A lot of today's topic is going to be about the philosophies and underpinnings behind qualitative research, and how qualitative research is different from quantitative research, because that's very, very, very important. And then at the very, very end of this conversation that we're going to have today, we're going to talk about looking at problem statements and research questions and such. Now, I'm also going to be talking on, I think it's February 12th, February 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. And there I'm going to be talking about specific methodologies, like ethnography, grounded theory, phenomenology, narrative inquiry. In anthropology, you have, I think about this idea of colonialism and how you had, maybe a white male from the United Kingdom going over with a cork hat on his head, going over to the bush, being, looking at a village, hiding behind some rocks with, a telescope, looking at the natives and making notes, to see what those natives were doing. It was about the self as the researcher observing the other as the research. There was a definite separation between the researcher and the other, and there's a clear hierarchy between the two. Okay, and other fields had. In other fields, there were foundations of qualitative research, including education, history, political science, business, medicine, nursing, social work, communications. When you think about advertising, a lot of advertising is based on qualitative research, focus groups to see if different advertising works for different populations, to see if a certain product tastes good. Even, my husband was asked to be in a focus group about a pilot TV show, and so he went down to a ballroom at a hotel downtown San Diego, and was asked to go in there and watch these two pilot shows and rate these, do these ratings, and he said that they were both pretty bad. And so but a lot of things in our society, a lot of businesses, a lot of corporations are run using qualitative research methods. And so there are 7 movements of qualitative research in North America. And I'm going to back up so I can see this better. You have the traditional, the modernist or golden age, blurred genres, crisis of representation, postmodern, post-experimental inquiry, and the future. And I'm going to go through each stage. Okay, the traditional from 1900 to 1950 was primarily ethnographic research. And ethnographic research, when you take the word ethnography, it's ethno, which is what? Ethno, which is, does anyone know? Culture, and then graphy, study of. So the study of culture. Okay, so it's again that little, skinny British white guy going to the bush studying the natives. It's believing that people, from the 1900 to 1950s, qualitative researchers believed that they could have an objective, knowable understanding of their participants, of these, and they didn't even call them participants, they called them subjects, they called them the natives. They called them culture groups, whatever. There was a definite distinction between the researchers and the researched, and the other who was studied was considered alien, foreign, and strange. And so that there was a definite power differential between the researcher and the researched. The myth of the lone ethnographer, not the lone ranger, the lone ethnographer or field worker. And this man, usually a white man, as I said, organized written accounts in terms of 4 beliefs or commitments: objectivism, imperialism, monumentalism, and timelessness. And I spoke of objectivism, saying that you can kind of interpret, or I'm sorry, not interpret, but you could, as the researcher, achieve an objective, known understanding of the culture you were studying. Imperialism is that believing that your culture is better than the culture you're studying, is better, more sophisticated, more superior, more evolved. That would be a big one. And then a monumentalism is that, that it was a kind of a big deal for you to be studying this, like a monumental occasion. And then timelessness is that whatever you studied, this culture, like this tribe, and what you wrote down, that was it. And that didn't change. So whatever you studied did not change. And there was nothing fluid about it. And that was the truth about this culture that you were studying. Big T truth. And you're going to hear me talk about big T truths and big and little T truths. And what I mean by that is that big T truths are truths that are unchangeable, that it is the truth with a capital T, and that it is knowable, it is objective, it is attainable, it is measurable. Quantitative research aims to attain big T truths, okay, versus little T truths are truths that are more fluid. They depend on the perspective of the researcher and the researched, and they have to deal with multiplicity, the multiple perspectives of different people, and again, it changes over time. But this was a sense of timelessness. Okay, but also during this time, you have this kind of imperialistic, colonialistic movement of qualitative research happening. But at the same time, you have this movement in the Chicago school saying, okay, all these people, especially in Europe, these European powers are going out to Africa, they're going to Asia, they're going to these unsophisticated cultures per se, and it's studying them. And we have all these different kinds of groups in the United States. So why can't we look at these different kinds of groups, not seeing them necessarily as different as in terms of in a negative way, but different as in, wow, it's in a positive way. And in order to try to keep the voice and language of these different groups. I mean, just when you think about it, just in Chicago, just the different kinds of groups from, the African American groups in Chicago, from the Irish populations during that time, the 1900s to the 1950s, the Irish populations in Chicago. And to try to develop more of an interpretive methodology as opposed to an objective methodology. And what I mean by interpretive methodology is having this acknowledgement that I, as a researcher, have biases, and that I am going to have a measure of that my biases and that my lenses of gender, ethnicity, race, religion, experience, education, socioeconomical status. All of that is going to go into my interpretation of the person that I'm interviewing. And so, so that is, to be able to acknowledge that overtly is a really clear component of the interpretive methodology. And that interpretive methodology is really on a continuum that of when you think of qualitative research as a whole, and there's tons of different kinds of qualitative research. I went to a big, the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry at the University of Illinois. I presented at there in last May. And there were so many different kinds of methodologies, and it was just so exciting. And there was a huge spectrum of interpretation from really wide levels of interpretation, where there's more of a gap between what the participant experienced and what the interpretation that the researcher did to produce the results. And then there was a less, if you go to the other end of the continuum, there was a less of a gap between what the participants said or reported and what the results were. Does that make sense? That there's a continuum? Okay. All right, so from 1950 to 1970, there was an emergence of new interpretive theories, ethnomethodology, phenomenology, critical theory, and feminism. So when you think about 1950 to 1970, what was going on in the United States was the feminist movement was taking hold, lots of social activism, the civil rights movement, and all of that bled into the development of many qualitative researchers. And researchers really started saying, hey, we need to use qualitative research to give voice to the society's underclass and to create space for participants who, in a lot of these other studies, don't have voices. They're just assigned a number and they're not really given a voice. They're just one of maybe thousands, versus this qualitative research, they are given a voice. And here's a group of people who are not usually researched. I'm going to go down to inner city San Diego and interview the homeless. Or I'm going to go to inner city San Diego or go to some places in San Diego and interview some of the Mexican day workers that are on the side of the road. There's an actual article, not from San Diego, but somewhere in California, about someone who did an interview of Mexican day workers that live in California. There's not a lot of research out there, but here is a group of very oppressed group of people, historically oppressed group of people, and qualitative research can be used as in an activistic way, and that started happening more during this period. Okay. And also a post-positivist viewpoint came out. And post-positivism, I'll talk a little bit more later, but the view of post-positivism is that there is a reality out there, but it is not knowable. We'll never understand it completely. We'll just understand parts of it. We'll never understand it completely, and I'll talk more about that in a little while. Okay? And so during this time, researchers also tried to take quantitative ideas about internal, external validity to constructionist and interactionist conceptions. And so, you know, there was this intentional effort to take qualitative or quantitative ways of proving reliability and validity to validate qualitative research and to translate that to quantitative research. Okay, but this also what was happening, there was this reinforced picture of qualitative researchers as this cultural romantics. It's like these qualitative researchers were going out to, you know, do activism and go to quarters unattained in the United States, but this movement ended with the Vietnam War. Okay, from 1970 to 1986, there's blurred genres, and the primary figure was Geertz, who wrote 2 books, The Interpretation of Culture and Local Knowledge. Geertz argued that old functional positivist behavioral totalizing approaches to human disciplines were giving way to more pluralistic, interpretive, open-ended perspective. Okay, and the boundaries between social sciences and humanities had become blurred, and the essay as an art form was replacing the scientific article. So what was happening is that qualitative research began creeping closer toward the arts and humanities, and so the way that qualitative research was being expressed started to look a little bit more about how the arts and humanities were being expressed. So, for example, it could be expressed in an essay, maybe in a short story form. There's even performance methodology for qualitative research. Now, whether or not you'd be able to do performance methodology for a dissertation, I'm not sure, but you know, it's out there. People do it for sure. Okay, from 1986 to 1990, there's a crisis of representation. Research and writing became more reflexive, and when I say reflexive, there was is that researchers began to question more and more what they were, you know, their own intentions and their own, they became more reflective on what they were doing throughout the qualitative research process. They began to do more critical thinking about issues of gender, class, and race. They began to look at their own privileges of education, of socioeconomic class, of race, ethnicity, gender, or their privileges, maybe their own senses of feelings of oppression, anything that could affect the interpretive process. And so that began to come out more in the qualitative research, things that were publications. And so new models of truth, method, and representation were sought. And critical feminist and epistemologies of color were also coming out during this time. Okay, those issues of validity, reliability, and objectivity, previously believed settled, became once more problematic. You know, they said, okay, we thought we kind of figured out how to make qualitative research valid and reliable. Well, that sort of, as a reflexive process started happening more, they thought, well, how can we, you know, with our own biases, is that possible, you know? And so more fragmenting began to happen. There began to be a lot different ways to do areas of validity, reliability, or trustworthiness, or credibility, which is, those terms are often bandied about. One cool quotation from a researcher is that, "I learned a lesson, informants routinely lie to their anthropologists." So, you know, for an anthropology qualitative researcher, say, you know, you have to realize that the information that you're getting from your participant may not be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. You know, if you're trying to get an objective reality from that person. So, you know, that's why it's like, well, what is truth and what is reality? You have to start examining those things and realize that the information you're getting could be very fluid, and you have to be very overt about that. One thing I tell my students is that, you know, biases exist in all research. Biases exist in quantitative and qualitative research. Qualitative research just makes the biases overt, very overt in the process. Okay, Stoller, from whom the quotation was, and he ended up writing a memoir recognizing the relationship between the researcher and the world being researched. And that continuum I talked to you about that interpretation, that level of interpretation, whether the gap is small, narrow, or the gap is large, it really depends on the relationship between the researcher and the researched. So during this time, you know, there began to be experiments in writing, a self-consciousness about writing. What I mean by that is just a sense of self-awareness. More qualitative researchers write from the I perspective. It's very important as a qualitative researcher to write from the I perspective. And although, you know, we're still struggling with some journals who publish qualitative researcher, they still want you not to, you know, to write it in third person, but all qualitative journals have you write in the I perspective, and a lot of journals are moving more towards you writing it from the I perspective. Having writing being a method of inquiry, and having there be no difference between field work and writing, is that the writing actually occurs when you're out in the field, you know, interviewing. You might do what's called bracketing, and so you might, be planning to interview a participant, and right before you interview a participant, you may do what's called bracketing. So you may say, okay, I'm coming up to interview with this participant about one study I did was on prayer and therapy, because I come from the marital and family therapy program. And so when I was about to do an interview on someone, say, who's a Muslim who integrates prayer and therapy, and I come from a Christian perspective, so I would write about kind of my thoughts and experiences and my biases, and that before the interview. I bracket that, and then I'd have the interview, and then I would, immediately after the interview, I would write my thoughts and experience and perspectives and what came up for me during the interview, any feelings, and then just any observations I had during the interview.
Can I just, maybe you can speak about how the qualitative works with APA format, because isn't APA you're supposed to write in the third person, or no?
Right. Actually, that's changing. Okay. Yeah. Right. The APA it's changing. That they are actually wanting to move more toward the first person. Yeah. So, but no, qualitative research needs to be written from the first person. However, you know, if your dissertation chair tells you to write it from the third person, write it from the third person. So do what your dissertation chair tells you to do. But, and again, I mean, there's a lot of different perspectives about qualitative research, as there are a lot of different perspectives about quantitative. But the general consensus is when you write qualitative research, you write from the I, because you're making very overt your own biases, your perspectives, and you share that, in the self of the researcher part in the writing up of it. When I have my students who write qualitative dissertations, that's like a big chunk of the dissertation, the self of the researcher part of it. So, yeah, if you want to see a copy of a qualitative dissertation, you can email me, on the card, or the email address on the card. So, okay, on the postmodern, the struggle to make a sense of two crises, the realization that qualitative research cannot directly capture lived experience. So it's that realization that, it's not, if we're not looking at objective reality, and how can we represent the quote other when we don't want to other them? Does that make sense? We don't want to put the people that we're interviewing, we don't want to we want to try to minimize the power differential between us and the participants. And that is something in qualitative research that is very different than quantitative research, is that you're really trying to overtly minimize the power differential. And some qualitative researchers go to the point at which they call their participants co-researchers, to really try to minimize that hierarchy. Again, using participants instead of sample, is another way that qualitative researchers do it. But just that use, just having a perspective of respect and care, and realizing that they're giving your time, and it's a very kind of unique, intimate experience to research and to interview participants for qualitative studies. It's a life-changing experience that changes both researcher and researched. So the concept of aloof observer has been abandoned. Participatory and action-oriented research on the horizon. I'll talk about that in February. Search for grand narratives, replaced by more local, small-scale theories. Some people say that qualitative research has a limitation because it can't be generalizable, but that's not a limitation, because that's not the goal for qualitative research. The goal for qualitative research is to create localized knowledge. For me, I did this, the most recent study I did is interviewing family therapists who had the common experience of integrating prayer into therapy. And I did what's called maximum variation sampling, where I looked at people from different faiths. I looked at people who, I looked at people who, Muslims, Shinto, Buddhists. I looked at Catholics, Protestants, all Jewish, all different kinds of faiths. But I was looking at, I was looking at family therapists, and I was looking at a small group of people. I interviewed 17 people. And so I was looking at specific problems in particular situations. Now, if, when you write up your studies, and I submitted it to a journal that I'm waiting to hear back from, you're waiting to, you say, okay, you write up the study so someone can repeat it, right? So if someone else, in a qualitative study, if someone else repeated it, they would not get the same results. I mean, that's the whole philosophy behind qualitative research, is that person would not get the same results, because the idea of truth and knowledge and the act of interpretation is so fluid that it changes. It would be a different researcher. It would be a different group of people being researched, and different kinds of interactions. And so that whole thing would be changed so much that knowledge itself would be different. So I mean, there might be some themes and things that would come up that would be the same, but a lot of it would be different. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so post-experimental in the future, concerned with moral discourse and development of sacred textualities, and desires that social sciences, humanities become sites for critical conversations about democracy, race, gender, class, nation states, globalization, freedom, and community. Okay, so what? So what? We talked about these 7 movements, so what? So each of these movements is still operating in present, either as legacy or a set of practices. So multiple and fractured histories of qualitative research make it possible for anyone to attach a project to a canonical text from each of these movements. Okay, so like any of those movements that we talked about are still going on. People are still doing qualitative research from that objective perspective. And that objective kind of imperialistic perspective that they're working from all those different perspectives, and so it makes kind of a fragmented embarrassment of choices that now characterize the field of qualitative inquiry. It can kind of be very overwhelming for some people who are aiming to do a qualitative dissertation. But it's also very exciting, because that's one reason that I just love doing qualitative research, is that it's really changing, and it's very cutting edge. Is that every year something is new, and actually at this the Congress for Qualitative Inquiry is it's doing every year it has a qualitative dissertation award for an experimental methodology. It's for people who come up with their own methodology, which I think that is very interesting. So new ways of looking, interpreting, arguing, and writing are debated and discussed. So qualitative research can't be viewed within a neutral or objective positivist perspective. Class, race, gender, and ethnicity shape the process of inquiry. And just the fact that research is a multicultural perspective, and that there's this idea of multiplicity, I think that is really, really, really important. Is that there's multiple perspectives and multiple views. Okay, and as qualitative researchers, we share the fundamental aim of attending to the experience of living. We serve in the process of understanding how life is, and that's one thing that is just so amazing about qualitative research, is that you are sitting in a chair. If you're doing an interview, you're sitting in a chair, and you're people are opening their lives to you. They're opening up a level of their life to you, and it's an amazing, vulnerable thing that they're doing, and it's very, very powerful. And so we want to know about the fundamental processes of life and change, and we're intrigued by how we relate to and are affected by our environments. And that's another thing that we do in the interpretive process in qualitative research, is that we situate our results in whatever in our environments, whether it's the localized environment, like for my study it would be the family therapy field, but you also have to think of historical environments, what is going on, in the family therapy field at that time. You've got to look at, larger pictures, larger socioeconomic pressures, like the larger mental health field, can religion be integrated into mental health? The larger conversations about that and how, that might affect individual therapists and their experiences in integrating prayer and therapy, like that kinds of things. So you have to consider like the different the different systems that may influence that. So, I've got to consider all of that.
In integrating prayer, do you not run into conflict with government or public institutions when you're, I don't know?
Oh, like if you're working from public health? Yeah, maybe I can answer that after the thing, because of the videos running. Yeah. And we are interested in how we live in relationships. Yeah, I think that is a really important piece as well. Challenges are learning how to be attentive to life as we encounter it, committing ourselves to practice. Learning how to observe is really important, and situating ourselves in order to see most effectively is also important. And returning again and again to our observations in order to build confidence in our understandings. And when you do an analysis, data analysis for qualitative research, that's what you do. It's like the circular pattern. You just go back to the data, go back to the data, go back to the data. Keep going back to the data. And then you cultivate this beginner's mind in a stance of not knowing. So it's you take this stance of trying to like set aside your biases, and that's what the bracketing does, is that I have my students I have my students in the qualitative class do a full research project with data analysis and writing up the results and everything, and I have them write up start out by writing out all their biases about this particular topic that they're researching, so they can kind of come into this research topic with more of an open mind, saying, okay, I may be researching say I'm going to research mindfulness meditation and its use in therapy. So what sort of maybe biases or past experiences do I have with mindfulness meditation in that? So, and then developing our attention and how attentive we can be when we're interviewing people, or when you're conducting focus groups or doing observations of people, and recognizing our own embeddedness in the experiential life world, acknowledging that we ourselves are we're researching people while being embedded in the society with that is affecting people we research. So again, we can't have that objective perspective of reality. We can't get that. Okay, so any questions thus far? Nope. Okay. All right. So we bring our worldviews, paradigms, and beliefs to the research project. So we might bring our worldviews as a business person, we might bring our worldviews as psychologists or whatnot into the research project. And so our perspectives inform the conduct and writing and creating of the qualitative study. And so we must be aware of our philosophical assumptions. You know, and sometimes we think that our philosophical assumptions, you know, are just from us and we made them up and, you know, aren't we smart? But a lot of the times our philosophical assumptions have been grounded in grounded in certain philosophies that have been around for a long time. You know, like what the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible says, nothing new under the sun, right? And yeah, you're nodding back there. It's true, you know, and like in terms of Western philosophers, there's some standing, I threw some up there: Descartes, Pythagoras, Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, Plato, Socrates, Thoreau. You know, that's influenced modern, you could say Freud, you know, Beck, Ellis, you know, the influence modern psychology and others that might influence modern business models. So we have philosophical assumptions with implications for practice: ontological, epistemological, axiological, rhetorical, methodological. And as qualitative researchers, we need to really be aware of our assumptions in each of these areas. It's really, really important. And so ontological is what's the nature of reality, and that reality is subjective and multiple, as seen by the participants of the study. So implications for practice is that researchers uses quotations and themes and words of participants and provides evidence of different perspectives. And another example I can give is that I was at the National Council on Family Relations conference in December, and I went to a session on a woman who was a big family researcher, qualitative family researcher. I think she was at UC Riverside. And she's an editor not an editor, she was on the review board for several journals, and they sent all the qualitative articles to her because she was the qualitative person. And she said that I'm always suspicious when I read qualitative articles when it has a category and then all the quotations are representing that theme or category are all the same. There's not any nuanced quotations. And so she herself is looking, the reviewers for these articles is looking for nuances, that we're looking for multiplicity. She's looking for, so if you're writing your dissertation, you're doing qualitative research. Oh, thank you. You're writing your dissertation, you want to write it with nuances. You might generate these themes, these categories, these stories, but you want to write it with nuance. You want to say, okay, like for my prayer study, say I had, let me see if I can remember one of the themes, water under the bridge, since I wrote it up. One of the themes was ethics. You need to be very ethical, when you integrate prayer into therapy. So one of them might say, okay, being ethical might mean I don't bring up prayer at all unless the client brings it up first. I don't even have it on my intake form. I don't have it anywhere. But then maybe other people who work, like one woman who worked primarily with she's Muslim, worked primarily with the Muslim population. She brought it up because it fit the cultural and religious context in which she worked. Another woman worked with a primarily Christian population. But another one worked with a primarily Muslim or Mormon population, and their beliefs about therapy and exchanging money and stuff like that didn't fit with bringing up spiritual issues overtly as much in therapy. So it was very interesting. There were nuances that you needed to tease out just in one section, and that's what makes it so rich. What you read a lot in the qualitative literature is they say you need to provide a thick and rich description, and what they mean by that is that nuanced, that that there's that multiple viewpoints even with similar categories. So thick and rich description. Okay. So for epistemological, what is the relationship between the researcher and that being researched? The researcher attempts to lessen the distance between herself, himself, and that being researched. So the researcher can collaborate, spend time in the field with participants, and become an insider. Now, there's some types of qualitative research where you actually join, you actually become part of that culture and do observations. If you're doing an ethnography, I read an article on the straight edge movement. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. It's like it's an alternative movement of people who, might, do piercings and tattoos, and you think like alternative living, but they don't drink, they don't do drugs, they have kind of quote clean living, but they don't look like they do. They're called a straight edge movement. So I read an article on that as someone who kind of they would hang out with them, they would observe. And they would become an insider. But what you would need to do when you did that, you would need to get a gatekeeper to kind of let you into that culture, someone who is a member of that culture to kind of introduce you and let you into that culture. Now, you can be a part of that culture and study that culture as well. That would be totally okay and acceptable. Like you, sir. What was your first name?
Mine?
Yes.
Kip, K-I-P.
Kip, you're part of that culture that you're studying, the retired group. Yes. So you have more credibility when you're going in and talking to those people because you're part of that group. So if I were to go in and talk to that group, I would probably have less credibility talking to them. So axiological, what is the role of values? So you need to acknowledge that research is value-laden, and that, again, like I have been saying, that biases are present. And so in your dissertation, you need to talk about how you need to talk about how values shape your narrative and include your own interpretation in conjunction with the interpretations of participants. Now, whether or not, or the degree to which you write and include your own, self of the researcher stuff, or narrative depends on A, what kind of methodology you use, and B, kind of who your chair and committee are and how much of that they want in your dissertation, and C, well, I guess just A or B, and then if you write it up in an article, what kind of journal you're submitting it to and how much space you have to include that kind of thing. So, but again, like I mentioned before, I have my students definitely include that in their in their write-ups. Okay, rhetorical. This is really, really important, just the rhetoric, not only the rhetoric of the participants talking, but the rhetoric of you as a researcher, because you know, there's a what's the word? Tendency to write in a very, like I said, third person, kind of lofty academic voice, but really a lot of qualitative research nowadays is wanting you to write in a more literary, informal style, using the personal voice and using qualitative terminology. That's really important, using the qualitative terminology and limited definitions. And what you want to do, like I've always found that qualitative research articles tend to be more interesting to my students than quantitative research, in part because of the quotations and the voices of the participants that come through, and that's just really interesting, but also the personal voice of the researcher that just grabs the grabs the readers from the beginning, from the get-go. And like I said, use the first person pronoun. And you know what I would do, as you know, when you're writing your qualitative dissertation, is that I would look up other kinds of dissertations, other kinds of qualitative dissertations that use the same methodology as you did. That's what I tell my dissertation students, is that, you know, if my dissertation students are using like a transcendental phenomenology approach or like a narrative inquiry approach, I say, okay, go find at least 3 different dissertations. Go on ProQuest. Go find 3 different dissertations that use the same methodology, and let's find one that fits your style best, and let's decide which would work best for you. So that has been really helpful. Okay, methodological is what is the process of research. And talking about the process is really important in qualitative research because you use inductive logic, you study the topic within its context. Again, like I talked about, sociological context, cultural context, and you use an emerging design. And what I mean by emerging design is that you don't do the hypotheses first, right? You don't come up with the hypotheses first, like you did in quantitative research. You come up with a research question and maybe a problem statement, but you don't come up with hypotheses because you're not predicting anything. You're just looking at what emerges from the data. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's been bothering me as I do all my work, is that, you know, I want to interview these people to get their opinions and stuff, but I have no hypothesis as to what I think their answer should be before I go in. So I'm glad to find out you don't need one.
No, you're not supposed to have them.
Good.
That's not good to have hypotheses. Not good to have hypotheses in qualitative research. Not good.
Good.
No.
It's good that it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. So, you know, what you do is you work out the details, and then sometimes you just revise the questions based on, you can revise the questions based on your field experience, but the way that the IRB is set up, you kind of have to have it all set up before all the research questions established before you send it to IRB. Although I've had students revise IRB after they go to the field and realize they needed to revise the questions to better suit the participants, and so you send an addendum to the IRB and to revise their questions. So that's what they did. So, okay, so 4 worldviews that inform qualitative research. Post-positivism. Immanuel Kant is a German philosopher from the 18th century. Transcendental idealism is a doctrine. And remember, again, like we talked about, nothing new is under the sun. So a lot of these philosophies that we ourselves hold, the kinds of ideas that we should be bracketing during our qualitative research process is could be coming from these philosophers. So our experience of things is about how they appear to us, but not about those things as how they are in and of themselves, but how they appear to us. Okay? So, like, for example, let me give you an example. So, like, if you have, like, this bottle of water, and you have a bottle of water that, you might describe it as what it is. It's a container, and it contains a clear liquid fluid. But, when I describe this bottle of water, I describe it as something that I know that I have drunk out of several times, not out of only this bottle, but out of several different bottles. And I know that I've drunk water probably thousands and thousands and maybe over 1 million times in my life. So I go back to all these different experiences. So what Immanuel Kant was talking about is that we have the water, but also the experiences that we've gone through. So this goes back to post-positivism, is that big T truth exists, but because people came from different backgrounds and have varied experiences, people do not experience this truth in the same way. So it's impossible to attain the truth and the whole truth objectively because of our different perspectives. So truth objectively exists apart from us, but we see it and interpret it subjectively. Okay, so it takes a scientific approach to research, and the approach has elements of being reductionistic, logical, empirically focused, cause and effect oriented, deterministic, and includes people with prior quantitative research training. Okay, and so post-positivism researchers view inquiry as a series of logically related steps, believes in multiple perspectives from participants rather than a single reality, espouses rigorous methods of qualitative data collection and analysis. One thing I use when I describe post-positivism as post-positivistic ways of thinking is it's like if you had an elephant in the room and all of us were blind, right? And so I say, okay, this elephant is truth, okay? So I want you to step forward and tell me what truth is. And so if this is the front of the elephant, so I would say, okay, truth is this long, thick feeling thing, roundish with like 2 holes on the end that's spouting out liquid. And then you would say, no, truth is this kind of flat thing with wrinkles. And then you would say, truth, no, it's this, you'd be by the ear, it's this flappy thing that moves back and forth. And you'd be by the tail and say, no, truth is this skinny thing with a tuft. We'd all have different perspectives of what truth is. So that's post-positivism. And so also a post-positivistic perspective is using computer programs. And I don't know if you all know that there are computer programs to use qualitative research methods, such as in vivo. It's, let's see, I can write it. NVIVO. And then there's one called Nudist. It's like N*DIST. Like, I don't know why they don't spell it as nudist, but I guess, I don't know.
Question, please.
Yes.
I know how to turn a computer on. So the question is, when you're quite illiterate in computers, do you recommend I use one of these?
No.
No, okay, good.
No. Yeah, I don't know. I think that, personally, I think that you need to go through like extensive training to get it. So if you go through the training, that it can be helpful. But, you know, and if you have like Dr. Kawahara, she knows how to use in vivo, you know, and so, you know, if you can have someone training you how to do it who knows it. But I've used in vivo before, and I just didn't like it. I came up with my own method using Microsoft Word, and that works for me. So.
But in creating, what do you want, a little card you're going to create, or you read, you want to take, you know, the author's name and so forth, number for reference purposes. So so did you create a card that every time you read it and got something important, it would put out, and then at the end you just, you know?
No, this is for managing data, for managing like the interview data that you get from the participants. Oh no, yeah. No, this is managing the data, and what you're asking might be, yeah. There's actually something on the. On the like creating a lit review, yeah. You know, this is for managing data.
Well, I know where you record, if you interview people, where you record the interviews, you know, thoughts and impressions.
Right.
And then
There's
you write notes about, you know, what your feelings are.
Right.
Also have the reference material, but aside from that, it's how to write down your impressions of each interview in a detailed form. Right.
And in terms of writing a recording, there's a recording program that you can download. I just bring my laptop actually when I record. You know, some people go out and buy digital recorders, but I find you can just bring your laptop and just record. I just forgot the name of it, but a lot of the laptops have recording programs already built in on them, and I just forgot the name of the program. It'll come to me, but there's a program that's Audacity, 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 and you can download it for free. And it's a really great program because when you interview people through your computer, you need a microphone. So if you don't have like a little microphone built in on your computer, you can just go buy a cheap microphone for $12 at Best Buy. And then, and so you bring your laptop and have them, have your participants there and, you know, record the interview. And then when you're actually transcribing, you can slow down the participants talking. And so that's really, really helpful when you're transcribing the interview. Or if you hire a transcriber, the Audacity program, you know, can easily convert it to a file, a WAV file, or a specific file that you can send to your transcriber very easily. So it's an excellent program. That's what I said. It's easier to do that than to deal with a digital recorder, in my opinion, if you don't mind bringing your laptop to, if you have a laptop. So, any other questions? No? Okay. Okay, constructivism, first used by Piaget. a perspective in philosophy that views that all of our knowledge is constructed under the assumption that it does not necessarily reflect any external transcendent realities. It's contingent on convention, human perception, and social experience. And so essentially, in constructivism, reality exists as you perceive it from the outside, and it's individually based. Reality is individually based, and you construct it as you take it in or perceive it. So like I construct reality and I take it in through the different lenses that I have. And it comes from Hegel, Garnes, and Marx. Okay? And so going back to that continuum I talked about with, the different types of relationships you have with your participants and the degree of interpretation, is that this is really trying to be close to the participants' view of the situation. You're recognizing that subjective meanings emerge through the social interaction. You're really focusing on the historical cultural norms, narrative inquiry types of methodologies or come through a constructivistic type of philosophy. I had a student do this, do a narrative inquiry, and very much situated it in cultural, sociological, historical norms, looking at interaction, really talking about the researcher's background. She included her own background a lot in her in the write-up, and we actually wrote this up for submission to a journal, and she included that again, her background a lot more than you would if you were writing up something that comes from a more post-positivist perspective, like a phenomenology. So narrative inquiry, you would write that up more. Advocacy, participatory. So advocacy, participatory action research is just saying that post-positivist structural laws and theories don't fit marginalized individuals or groups. It's saying that constructivists aren't doing enough to advocate for marginalized and historically oppressed groups. Participatory action research, what it does is that it does research that goes out into the community and does change, advocates for change. So if there was a elementary school in a inner city community, and the elementary school is really run down, and say for my research, I wanted to help the elementary school get more books for its library. So I would go in and work with the people in the school. They would definitely be my co-researchers. It would be all together, really minimizing the hierarchy, and we would work together to do this project. And the goal of the research is to help these kids in the school and to get more books for this library and help build a better library. And so that's what participatory action research is doing something like that. Okay, yeah, it should contain an action agenda. It's for changing lives of the participants, the institutions, and even changing the lives of the researchers. It really looks at oppression, domination, suppression, alienation, and then hegemony, looking at how dominant groups and individuals can maintain their power. Again, like I said, collaboration with the researchers. And you work with the people in the school to analyze data. So like what you might do is you might get focus groups in the schools for all the teachers to ask them what books need to be represented in the library. You might like even have kids, like a fun, do research, polls of the, or not polls, but do interviews of the kids about how, what change the library can make, if they had better books or something like that. So it's really important to have the participants' voices heard, Okay, and the last kind of research is pragmatism, and this is a very, United States, very American way of doing research. The focus is on outcome. Just tell us what works, folks. It's really like we don't really care about philosophy, reality, the laws of nature. We just want it done. So, a lot of businesses, a lot of, commercial entities, maybe even, the U.S. government or state governments, are more pragmatic in their way of doing research. Okay? All right. So we're doing well on time. Any questions?
Could you explain that the pragmatism is not as involved as the advocacy?
No, pragmatism is more, it's more like, if you're at a business setting and the business is like, okay, we have this problem we have a problem of, okay, let's get really, surfacey. Say we have a problem of the employee break room is a mess, okay? So how can we get it done? So let's, what can we do to get it done? Let's survey everybody and their whatever, on when they use the break room. Let's interview everybody on ideas about how we can keep the break room clean. So it's like they don't care about philosophy. They don't care about anything. It's very pragmatic. It's very pragmatic, It's whatever works. Multiple methods, mixed methods of data collection. It's like, I don't care about all these philosophical, I don't care about activism, I don't care about advocacy. It's just, we just want to solve the problem. It's trying to, very goal-oriented, aiming to solve the problem.
But the employees would be active participants, though, right?
They were, yeah. The employees would be active participants, but it's not about advocacy, and it's not about addressing oppression or getting the voices. It's just about dealing with a problem. It's just about fixing the problem. It's not about, we want to empower the employees to get your break room voices heard, or you know what I mean? It's like we want to, it would be different. It's like, if they're trying to explore the underlying meaning of, exists an expression of their dissatisfaction of the work, that's a whole different ballgame than if they would be, we just want to get the break room clean. That's just pragmatism. Yeah. Good question. All right. So introducing and focusing the study. So the research problem can be called the need for the study. And this is really what focuses the study. An intent is to provide a rationale or need for studying a particular issue or problem. And I took this template from Creswell, and I have the reference on the very last slide. Creswell's 5 approaches in 2007, and he's coming out with a new book in 2011, I think this summer. So that's what he told me at the Qualitative conference. So I really, really like Creswell's book. I highly recommend you buying it. It is, I call it my qualitative sacred text. So, so the way that I wrote this, and I wrote this as a phenomenological study because this is how what I have my students do, but it might be a different kind of study. It might be like a phenomenology, which I'll talk about next in the next meeting. A phenomenology is a study of people's individual lived experience. Like if people have all gone through the same thing. Like my prayer study was people had all experienced gone through the same experience of integrating prayer and therapy. That was the same individual lived experience. That's phenomenology. And there's different types of phenomenology. But it could be something else. It could be the purpose of this grounded theory study, purpose of this narrative inquiry study, or whatever type of methodology. So the methodology goes here. Okay? So the purpose of this, whatever methodology study is or will be, to understand, describe, or discover and this is where you put the central phenomenon or the focus of your study for the participants, whatever your participants are, at this site, okay? At whatever site you're using. And the site can be like in San Diego County or in, Southern California if you want to go bigger, or if you want to go to a specific site at, whatever community center or something like that. At this stage in the research, and then you repeat the central phenomenon will be generally defined as, then you have a general definition of the concept. Okay. Whoops. Okay, so what was your name with the pink water bottle?
Leslie.
Leslie? Okay, so what is your topic again?
Child custody evaluators' opinions and beliefs.
Okay, so and your methodology was the semi-structured?
Yeah, it's grounded theory.
Oh, it's grounded theory?
Semi-structured interview.
Okay, so Dr. Kawahara does a lot of grounded theory.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
she's
her.
not my chair.
Oh, she's not? Oh, okay. Okay, the purpose of this grounded theory study will be to, I don't know, pick one. Understand the
opinions and beliefs of child custody evaluators.
The opinions and beliefs of child custody evaluators
across the United States.
Okay, so you could just stop there. So you're not limiting it to Southern California or whatever. Okay. How many participants are you going for? About 10 participants. Okay. At this stage in the research, then you repeat that. The opinions and beliefs of child custody evaluators will be generally defined as, and then you get more specific. So what would the opinions and beliefs of child custody evaluators would be defined as?
I guess, well, some of the things we'll be looking at will be their training experiences.
As their training experiences
that impact their decisions.
Okay, as their training experiences and their personal life experiences that impact their decisions. Great, there you go. So there's your purpose statement. Excellent. Does anyone else want to try? No? Okay. You okay?
eventually.
Eventually.
A matter of opinion.
Okay. Okay, so, and then let's talk about interview questions, okay? So when you're doing interview questions, and interview questions can be used with individuals or with focus groups, or depending on your methodology, you could do couples or families as well. But you do open-ended, it could be evolving, like I talked about earlier, it can, they can change. Non-directional in terms of you're not trying to lead them, that's really, really important. Non-leading. You're trying to restate the purpose of the study in the more specific terms. That's why a statement like this is really important. This previous statement, the purpose statement is really important because that can help inform and guide what kind of questions you can have.
Question, please.
Yes, sir.
So I'm using grounded theory.
Okay.
And my reading of grounded theory, I recall, said, you really don't want to go into the interview with more than, tell me about yours. You really don't want a very formal list of questions.
Okay.
Is that correct?
It depends on what version of grounded theory you're using. Yeah.
I didn't know there were versions.
Yeah. There's more of a constructivist type of grounded theory from like Sharma's is a one grounded theorist, Charmuz, I think is how you spell it. And then like Strauss and Corbin, is that who you're reading? Strauss and Corbin? Yeah, Strauss and Corbin are the more of the like traditionalist of grounded theory. So yeah, it just depends on what kind of grounded theory that you'll get into. And what I'll do in the next meeting, February 12th, is I'll go through grounded theory more in detail and some other methodologies, but I'll take more time on grounded theory because it seems like there's people who are doing it. But it depends, like for like more constructivist perspective of grounded theory, you don't go in with as many questions, but with Strauss and Corbin's, you can go with more questions. My understanding of Strauss and Corbin, but I might need to polish up on my Strauss and Corbin. But Corbin and they have a new book out. It's like Corbin and someone else. I forget the other name. So, okay. And so you start with a grand tour question, which is, tell me about your whatever. That would be a grand tour question. Tell me about your experience as child custody evaluators. That would be your grand tour question, okay? And then you start with sub-questions or follow-up questions after that. And it's really important to start with what or how instead of why, so they can describe the process. So start with what or how rather than why. So they can describe the process. So again, the grand tour reduces the entire study to a single question. Tell me about yourself. What is the meaning? Do 41 men and 17 women with a diagnosis of AIDS ascribe to their illness? Tell me as much as you are comfortable right now sharing what happened to you when you were sexually abused. And then this is another way of doing interview questions that Creswell suggests. You don't have to do it this way. This is one way of doing it, is having issue sub-questions and procedural sub-questions. And issue, you take the phenomenon in the central research question and break it down into sub-questions. So like if your grantor is, what does it mean to be a college professor? Your issue sub-questions are, so what does it mean to be a college professor in the classroom, as a researcher, as an advisor? And then the procedural is you're identifying different components of it, like the central phenomenon and the causal conditions, interviewing questions and strategies and consequences. You might be asking more like underlying things, as, you know, how does it feel to be a professor? What does it mean to you? What are the, you know, more about the feelings and the underlying emotions and those kinds of things. So, what statements describe these experiences? Yeah, here's some. These are examples I took from the book, and I think, like for the, you know, average participant, these are two like high-end educated questions. When you're asking them about themes, context, and thoughts. But these particular questions are supposed to be asked to, you know, college professors, so that would work. But you need to be very aware, and this is an issue that my students have come up with, or that have come up against, is you have to be very aware when you're crafting your questions that they really fit your participants. And one thing that they have done, or that my students have suggested to me, is they do practice run. They do like a practice interview with a friend or a colleague, or maybe a couple practice interviews to see if the questions and answers make sense. That really helps. Because sometimes on paper it looks fine, but then when you ask it, someone, you know, you think, well, that didn't really make sense, or you're asking the same thing 3 different times, you know. Yeah. And one of my dissertation students actually took her question to someone in the field, and he like revised a bunch of things, and this was after we had sent them to IRB, and so we had to go back and send them and do a revision and an addendum, but that was fine. It didn't take much time to do an addendum, and it was worth it. Okay, and these are reference and recommended text, and I'm just going to go through them really quickly and explain what they are. The first is Creswell that I was talking to you about. Like I said, there should be a new version coming out in the summer, but if you need it now, get it. It's an excellent book. Daily, I put that up there. It's a good book, and I used that for creating this PowerPoint. The 3 Denzin and Lincoln texts. Norm Denzin is the man who's in charge of creating the Qualitative, the International Congress for Qualitative Research at the University of Illinois. He's a faculty at University of Illinois. So these 3 books are kind of like key volumes that might be helpful. If you're going to do interviews, the next book, the Cavall and Brinkman book, can be helpful for if you're doing interviews. Marshall and Rossman book I really like as an introduction to qualitative research. And then the Moustakis book is for if you're going to do phenomenology. And again, I'll talk about that more in the next meeting. So, yes, ma'am.
Would you recommend any of those for more the particularities of you know, what you do from transcription on, as far as finding your units of meaning and
data analysis?
Yeah, did any of them go through that really? Give a good description
for grounded theory?
Yeah.
Are you using the old or the new version of grounded theory? You don't know?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, because there's two different, as I was saying, there's more of the traditional, more of a post-positivistic version of grounded that comes from a post-positivistic perspective. Strauss, well, it came from two men, Glasser and Strauss. Grounded theory actually originated from I think it was San Francisco, Berkeley. I don't have my notes with me, but anyway, you have Glasser and Strauss and Corbin. And Glasser and Strauss started grounded theory, and they created this methodology to say, if you wanted to create this theory, look for, if there is a theory, if there is not a theory out there on the particular topic you're interested in, or a particular angle on which you're, seeking, then, grounded theory may fit for you. And what Glasser and Strauss wanted to do is they wanted to create a very teachable method, for graduate students and researchers, a very systematic way to present grounded theory methodology, and methodology and data analysis. And that's what they came up with, Glasser and Strauss. Now, Glasser and Strauss then ended up having a divorce, not a divorce, but they had a break, difference of opinion. And I can't remember right now what it was about. Okay, Glasser wanted to do the constant comparative method, and then Strauss wanted to do something else, I can't remember. And so they kind of broke apart. And so Strauss went together with Corbin, and that Strauss and Corbin did several volumes of methodology. The very axial and axial coding. They used axial and I forget the other type of coding that they do. Very comprehensive books. And then that was Strauss and Corbin. And then Strauss died, and then Corbin started writing it with somebody else. And so, but in the last few years, I think her name is first name is Kathy, but Sharma's saying, this really traditional systematic way of doing grounded theory, is well and good for people who are post-positivistic type thinking, who like, very, very strict, steps, and that's what they aim to do. They made it very teachable, very, very systematic. But Sharma is saying, if you're coming from a constructivistic perspective, that's not going to work for you. So coming from a constructivistic perspective, you'd want to look for Sharma's stuff on grounded theory. So, after this, we can look up their books, and I can show you, which ones. And so what you'll need to figure out, kind of where are you going to want to come from? Do you want a more systematic, very detailed steps, or are you more flexible? Do you want to come from a more constructivistic, interpretive methodology? It just depends on where your epistemology and paradigm is. So but we can look them up. I can help you with that. So, sure. So, I'm open for questions. We have some time. Any other questions?
Are there any times when it's okay to blend the two approaches, or do you always have to keep qualitative and quantitative separate?
Oh yeah, there's mixed methods research. And Creswell actually has a good book and like a reader on mixed methods research. And the thing you have to be careful with, I think, with mixed methods is that you don't take two full studies and combine them, because that's just like too much for anybody, and especially for a dissertation. So their recommendation, the literature's recommendation, is to take one study and have that be your primary emphasis, like whether that be qualitative or quantitative, and then supplement that with a few qualitative or quantitative things. Like here's an example. Like if you want to do a big, your quantitative study and do surveys of however many, people, like 200 people, then you might randomly select a couple people to interview and do a qualitative interview of a couple of people, or something like that. Or you could do, where the bulk of it is you do a qualitative interview of, like with my, that's not me, is it?
I had it on vibrate, so I don't know how to use these things either.
Oh, okay.
I apologize.
So,
If you hit the button,
but what you could do, like if I did my prayer study, I interviewed 17 people, but if I would have administered some sort of survey or a couple of surveys, to supplement. So if you see if one of them as a supplement, then that's how you could go about doing a mixed method.
And will there be a discussion of the literature review in this camp?
There was last year on how to do like a literature review. Do you know anything about that? No, there was. It's on the website. I forget which.
Okay. I just hope so.
Yeah, on how to find literature and how to.
And how to write it up.
Yeah.
I don't want 1A, 2A, 3A, I want a nice continuum.
Right, yeah.
As my chair says, Kip,